welcome back, panel. Thank you so much for being here to this final panel session on adaptive landscapes. This is our chance to wrap everything up that we've heard today and also learn in conversation with our speakers and really bring it all together. So I'd like to thank you all for being here. We've got Rob Cunningham in the middle from the Nature Conservancy's Resilient Watershed Programme, Ben Andrews, who's a farmer and Nuffield scholar, and also Will McBain from Arup, and thank you so much for coming down from way up north to be with us today. So we have got these three speakers. They're going to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about this question of adaptive landscapes, and then there will be the opportunity for us to ask questions and kind of continue the conversation before we wrap up and get to the awards. So, first of all, turning to each of you, could you just introduce yourselves, give a brief professional background for everybody in the audience, and then your feelings, your lens on this idea of landscape recovery versus adaptive landscapes. How are we, this whole kind of planning, what are we planning for and how are we building resilience into our futures? So, Rob, let me come to you first.
Okay, yeah, well, thanks for that. So, yeah, my name's Rob Cunningham. I work, the Nature Conservancy is this global organisation. If you saw me talking earlier today, you'll know that the programme I'm working on is part of a global programme where we're looking to create a kind of vehicles for investing in nature-based solutions at a watershed scale. And every single one of them has a common core, which is that there's a problem that needs to be solved. Often that's utilities, but it's also might be private companies, it might be flood risk issues. And so it's kind of really bringing together people who have who wish to invest in water security with landowners, land managers, and helping kind of deliver kind of nature-based solutions that tackle those problems. So really practical work on the ground. And we're working with Water Resources East to deliver a programme in Norfolk as well. And in terms of my background, I've worked in water my entire life, and it's always been really around the kind of intersection of nature conservation and water security, so flooding, drought, water quality. And in terms of this kind of adaptive management and landscape recovery, I think in your question you really touched on a really key point, is I think we all kind of instinctively go, yes, I'm buying into landscape, landscape recovery, nature recovery, and we need to kind of restore the functioning of our landscape. I think the thing that we really then struggle to coalesce around is, like, what's the end point? And do we genuinely share a common sense of where we're trying to get to, but also what the causes of the problems are? And I think that's one of the things that we really need to unpick, is actually, as we kind of like head towards kind of investing in landscapes and working together, I think, there will be some tough conversations about, like, well, why are we in this situation? How do we dig ourselves out of that? But, we're all here together. This is a fantastic event, and, it starts with a conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you. Ben.
I'm a farmer from way over the other side of the country in Herefordshire. We're an organic farm, farming about 600 acres, mixed, organic, so beef, vegetables, and arable. And we have the joy of farming with a river that runs right through the middle of the farm. So not only does it flood when we get a lot of rain, when Wales gets a lot of rain, we get all their water as well. And so yeah, few more hills around us collecting all that water. So our farm has flooded so progressively worse over the last few decades, to the point where land that we used to cultivate for vegetables and see a good return from, some brassicas and potatoes, we now don't even risk cultivating it. It's just pasture, and even that pasture is struggling to survive some of these flood events, which can have water on the ground for up to 6 months. So frustrated with that. I'm doing a Nuffield scholarship, as you say, so that's looking into catchment restoration and agriculture's roles in the causes of and solutions to flooding and pollution, because sort of pollution being sort of like the other side, two sides of the same coin, aren't they? And in the Y catchment where we are, I think that's probably got more publicity than any other river in the country for the condition, for the state of the water there. And then on top of that, also, so the farmers in a landscape recovery scheme. So we're just coming to the to the end of the development phase in round 2. Which is one of the round 2 projects. So that's 50 farmers over 5,000 hectares, all working together to try to improve water quality, reduce flooding, increase biodiversity, and still produce sustainable food.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And then finally, Will. And just to not apologise, but acknowledge that this panel is accidentally water-focused, but that's okay. Will.
Thanks, Emily. So, I'm very much water. I grew up on a farm up north in South Durham, in the sort of lower Teesdale, mixed family farm, but I wasn't able to take up a position on that enterprise. So I did a degree, and I graduated in 1992, the year of the Rio Earth Summit. And I've worked in water now for 30 years, and my clear focus has been on sort of integrated catchment management for flood and water management. But that's taken me down the route of major infrastructure planning. Some of these big reservoirs that are being looked at, I'm involved with railways and carbon capture plants, but also a lot of work for the Environment Agency on adaptation planning, particularly around the Humber, the Lincolnshire coast and the Fens. And that's possibly why you might have asked me along, because I can talk a little bit about adaptation pathways from the perspective of a water and environmental manager and civil engineer looking at long-term decision-making around how we can adapt these quite heavily engineered landscapes to create an environment in which people and nature can continue to thrive.
You've all just worked out then, like, why you're all here on the same panel, right?
Yeah.
Because you're all coming at the same issue, like functioning, resilient landscapes from slightly different directions, whether it's a practical perspective or a sort of an engineering perspective, and also kind of the finance angle as well, like how are we really driving this? So that's what we want to talk about. And there will be lots of opportunity for questions. So again, questions as per usual. Hopefully all of the ping pong people. Oh, still here. Yeah, ping pong people are still here. So just make sure you grab somebody's eye, and I will keep looking around as best I can. So, Will, I wanted to come to you first, because in designing and planning these landscape scale interventions, like they're big, right? The thing that kind of gets me is how we're thinking about uncertainty, particularly when we look forward into this very, as Tony was describing it, volatile, uncertain, all of that we know is happening in climate projections, in land use change, in sort of factoring in all of these different competing priorities. How do you do that when it comes to planning and designing adaptive landscapes? What's the practical thing that you can do?
Yeah, well, I think this term VUCA, it can stultify sort of through analysis paralysis. Okay. It's almost like having ADHD. There are 1,000,001 things to do. Where do you start? Actually, crikey, where do you start? And I think the wisdom I've got from working on these, we're working on 4 out of 5 national adaptation pathway planning pilots with the Environment Agency. So they're quite big projects looking at these big systems like the Humber, like the Fens. And for me, actually, the thing is to focus on, because uncertainties, it can be really destructive. It can be destructive of mental health, it can be destructive of social cohesion, of the economy. Uncertainty isn't helpful. And there are an awful lot of things that actually we can agree on, and that's what we're finding in talking to all the many stakeholders. The sea level is rising. I'm afraid, Donald, it is. And the river flows are increasing, and they are set to increase quite significantly. And we've got this intensification of the hydrological cycle, which is quite basic physics, actually. If you put more heat into a system, you will get these more intensified droughts and intensified rainfall. So we know that for sure. We also know that everybody wants landscapes that support society and allow people and nature to thrive, provide healthy and nutritious food, provision resources in a way that's sustainable and low impact, provide low energy systems. I think the problem is we're asking a huge amount from our landscapes, and we need to ask a huge amount from our landscapes, because too often we're thinking, well, we don't need to worry about it, we'll just get it from somewhere else. And for me, back to Rio 92, it's that thing around one planet living. We're using the resources of up to 10 planets in the global north. And we need to come back to Earth and realise that if we want to sustain the way we're living, we need to use the resources of a single planet, which means using our landscapes in a very intelligent and optimal way, which means bringing everyone together and doing the stuff that we're talking about today in a coordinated way.
But are you finding that you were sort of saying, all of these different things, all of these different changes, and all of these different pressures, and it's just too much, and you think about it theoretically, and it's just mind exploding, and you get these amazing technological interventions that kind of try and help reduce that to kind of say, well, this is how we should make decisions. But it strikes me still that the way projects get done is that somebody has a problem and they say, this is the most important problem because I can put some money behind it because there's a solution there that needs fixing, and then that becomes the most important problem to solve. And so it's still, is it just driven by economics from that perspective?
Well, I do. I do think it is up to the public sector and organisations like the Environment Agency to look at this situation objectively and do that baselining. I mean, for example, the Fens provides £3.1 billion a year in GVA from agriculture. That's a really important thing for the Environment Agency to understand, that yes, it does cost a lot to pump all that water, and it does cost a lot to maintain all those flood defences, but you're getting an awful lot of value out of that. So your adaptation pathway needs to take account of the fact that you don't write that off. That's actually probably one of the key things that you want to preserve. So coming back to your original question around decision-making in an uncertain world, the beauty of adaptation pathways is you look at the future we all want, and there's huge consensus about that, but realise that there are many ways to get there, and there are uncertainties. So the key with adaptation pathways, it can be useful when you've got this kind of problem to identify a number of different pathways with trigger points where you shift from one pathway to another. So you've still got the ultimate goal in mind, but you're acknowledging that things haven't turned out quite as you anticipated.
Okay. And so, Ben, I mean, we seem to have shifted from this situation where there was sort of an uncertainty as to whether it would flood or not to a almost certainty that it will flood, right? So how do you specifically adapt your business to be able to cope with that? And then also in the context of your Nuffield and what you're finding more broadly, how are you finding that farmers are how are they being resourced to adapt to this different picture of volatility?
Yeah, I think the way we've looked to adapt is through the various ELM schemes. It's looking at, okay, so this is a floodplain. It's going to flood. It needs to be as resilient to flooding as possible. And so when you've got 3-5 year agreements, that's one thing. But when the landscape recovery scheme came around and the lead for that contacted me saying, we're putting this together, do you want to be part of it? I absolutely jumped at the chance, because not only is it a chance to be part of something that is so, that sort of scale of nature restoration is so huge in our area, because we don't have the sort of, a lot of these schemes are done by, you can have like one landowner up in the Highlands that can do a whole landscape recovery scheme. We've got 50 farmers, over 5,000 hectares doing it. And it's certainty. And that is our, in something that is so uncertain and so volatile, when you have the opportunity to sign up to something that is a guaranteed income for 20 years, that gives you that certainty. When farming is so uncertain, when you don't know what the markets are doing from one year to the next, you don't know what the weather's doing, it is the one thing that you can say, right, okay, this is the chance that we get to sign up to this. But not only from the economic and the climate uncertainty, you've got the political uncertainty as well. And so if we don't change our farming practices now, is that going to be legislated in the future? And so will we then be stopped from farming in a specific way and not get compensated for it? So having this opportunity to sign up to a landscape recovery scheme is just financially for us, it's just yeah, bit of a lifeline, really, because there's nothing else we can do with the land.
Yeah.
So in terms of the Nuffield, went out to New Zealand back in March, which is a country that has long prided itself on the green and clean image that it's produces food in a very environmentally friendly way. It's a big green and pleasant land, but then I believe it was Greenpeace or Friends of the Earth did the Dirty Dairy campaign to highlight some of the environmental issues of extensive dairying, so like having cattle out on pasture all year round, and they were having serious issues with pollution and runoff, erosion. And it's there's a lot of farmers all getting together. They're big into their clusters out there. Every single little stream has got a cluster, and they are doing riparian planting. Such an easy win. Such an easy win. Just make a buffer, plant it up, and they don't have subsidies like we do. There's funding for these schemes, but then chatting to some of the people and why they do it. One of their biggest fears was, again, legislation. And they say, we feel we need to be doing this. Otherwise, the government is going to look at farming and say, you're not doing enough, and they're going to legislate. And so they're just trying to get that one step ahead. And there are some fantastic farmers out there who are doing some amazing things. But the riparian planting, it's not a silver bullet. It's not the thing that's going to fix rivers, completely solve the flooding and the pollution crisis. But it is such an easy thing to do, just not plough straight up to the riverbanks, which everyone seems to do in Herefordshire.
Bit of a no-brainer. So thank you, Rob. Coming on to you. I've been around and about kind of the private financing space for a while, so I was really interested to pick your brains on this one, which is, when you do these financial models and you look forward over the lifetime of a project and say, well, we're hoping to get this return from this particular ecosystem service, and then hope to sell the carbon at this particular price, whatever it might be. You need that certainty of returns to get sophisticated investors to look at these projects seriously, right? So how are we able to design projects that give that certainty of returns against what appears to be, objectively a really volatile future where we just don't know how nature's going to respond?
Yeah, well, I think there's kind of like the uncertainty piece. Ben, you already touched on political uncertainty. There's lots of different types of uncertainty and lots of different types of risk all of these projects kind of face into. Just on the political uncertainty, I was just thinking, I work with a team who are running projects all around the world, Latin America, Africa, Asia, and when they work in Norfolk, they've said this is the most politically unstable project they've ever run, because every couple of months, government policy changes. So that's a really interesting perspective. I think on the kind of risk and return and what are investors looking for? I mean, I think one of the key issues here is like really differentiating the market. Like different people have different risk appetites and want different things from the same parcel of land. Even a kilogram of phosphorus. So if I'm to sell a kilogram of phosphorus into the nutrient neutrality market, that's a compliance market. I have to guarantee that for 100 years, and I have to demonstrate without any, to a very high level of degree of certainty that I'm going to deliver a kilogram. If I do that through nature-based solutions, it probably means I'm delivering 3 kilograms, but I'm going to discount it down to 1 to reach that level of certainty. If I'm signing up to an ELM scheme, it's a 3-5 year project. Actually, it'll come to some degree of design guidance, but actually no one's monitoring what that particular outcome is. Probably the targeting's not brilliant because the data doesn't exist, etc. So who you're selling to makes a huge difference in terms of that risk and return. And I think there's always a lot of talk about the water companies wanting to invest in catchments, and absolutely we've seen a big growth in that. But that really started actually with drinking water risk management. So it was managing risk in the catchment. And so absolutely they wanted some sense that they were doing the right thing, but it's a risk management operation. It was relatively cheap in the grand scheme of things. You don't need a high level of certainty to say, yes, that's worth backing. It's a no regrets kind of investment. But if you're suddenly shifting to a flood risk management scheme for a community over there, and you're competing with a grey infrastructure solution or spending that money in another community, suddenly the level of certainty you have to reach is really high. So there is no silver bullet. I think there's policy reforms, there's kind of risk sharing type agreements, and then actually there's just the more we do these things, the more certainty that we have around the effectiveness of these things that we can sell into the market. Then we'll have more confidence. And some of these things, it's just a matter of scale. If we do a thing 100 times at a catchment scale, we have certainty it's going to work. That'll have an impact. If you ask me to say this individual thing at this location here, how many kilograms of phosphorus have you saved? Your buffer strips, that length of buffer strip there, what's that worth? That's a tough one to call. Put them along the whole river, I'll have more confidence in what I can tell you.
Yeah, super interesting. Joe.
I think one of the greatest threats we have with climate change is going to be access to water in the future. And it's going to be a big challenge between what access people will have to water, to what the environment can have, and to what food producers can have. How do we deal with those challenges? How do we capture the water when there's plenty of it around? And should there be a fair way of divvying up that water supply? Should every land and farmer have a water right so they can use it in however they wish to grow their produce or for the environment? Because what we don't want to do is create water oligarchs where you have those who have water and those who do not have water, because that would be a huge threat in the future. And just remember that nutritious food, such as fruit and vegetables, need water to grow.
Yes, sometimes from depleted aquifers in Spain. If you can believe it, Norfolk, east, generally not enough water. Where you're from, probably generally too much, right? And so I have heard it said before that it's not that there's not enough water, it's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? So, to Joe's question though, I mean, how are we making sure that we've got enough of it available in the right way, at the right time, and equitably?
I think that's the issue is, as you say, we don't have an issue with not enough water. It's just holding on to it when we've got a lot of it, and if that can be held back to stop it flooding places and then sort of released, sort of like slower release in some way. But one of the easy wins. I mean, it's 1% increase in soil organic matter can hold an additional 150,000 litres of water or something. So it's these are things where it's not just a physical reservoir of water. It's improving the land's carrying capacity of water, which, especially around us, where you go up into the hills in Wales, where you've got severely degraded hills that have been grazed like with sheep to absolutely like the last millimetre of grass. To get a sort of more species rich, higher towards sort of more scrub, anything like that, just to slow the water down, improve infiltration. I mean, you've got a massive win there. But in terms of sort of like water storage, the infrastructure.
No, I'm although I do make a living sort of helping get DCOs through to build large reservoirs, I'm a big fan of sort of demand side management. And I think the big wake up call for me is around what we call the hydraulic paradigm, that you think we need this much, so let's build the infrastructure to provide that much. But if you actually look at the use, we're using 142 litres per day per head in the UK at the moment, and that's way more than we actually need. But if you wanted to change that, there are various things you need to change about the Water Act, about Part H, the building regulation. But those things can be done, and we could start doing serious rainwater harvesting and using that for loo flushing. I mean, it is absolutely absurd that we use rainwater to flush toilets. Potable, given the energy required to... the average, every litre of water you use is lifted on average 125 metres, because a lot of it's pulled out of the ground. So it's going up 125 metres. It's very, very heavy stuff. So the water industry used 8 terawatts of electricity last year, shipping it around, pumping it around the countryside and treating it. I mean, that's just staggering. So
it's astonishing, but like, you know, we kind of are where we are now, and I do think sometimes with these things, you're like, well, how do you fix that? How do you actually meaningfully make a difference in a way that it's so bleeding obvious that we need to?
It's quite cheap. I mean, it costs about £3,000 to retrofit a property to put in a large rainwater harvesting tank. And there's a project enabling water smart communities, which is funded through the Ofwat Innovation Fund, which is looking at this very issue of how you can, because there's British standards for rainwater harvesting, there are British standards for grey water reuse, there's all the technology is there. There needs to be a bit of legislative change, but ultimately retrofitting properties in that way can be a more cost-effective way than building massive I mean, we need to build those anyway, but in terms of the next step, we need to focus on demand-side management in a much more serious-minded way. And on farms, it's all about storage. So this idea of a water grid and all those ponds that Iris was showing on that screen, it's staggering, isn't it? Just how much we have changed the landscape to take that storage out of it. We've lowered the water tables, we've removed so much soil moisture from the water table, we've drained the ponds, we've culverted the watercourses, and I think there is an opportunity to build back the landscape in a way that retains good drainage and good soil conditions, but also retains a lot more water within the farm that can be used for beneficial
Final few
use.
words on this, just around the financing mechanisms. You know, it's all very well to say it only costs £3,000 per home, but we're also talking about heat pump retrofitting and, you know, all of the other things that are kind of like wrong with the current housing infrastructure, right? So, like, how, you know, sort of thinking about on nature scale, like, where are the financing mechanisms really going to come from?
Yeah, well, is that classic, like, you wouldn't start from here? We've got poor housing stock, poor energy standards, poor water standards, and all the rest of it. Absolutely. I mean, I think that there are some win-wins. If we use less water in the home, we're heating less water, and it's something like 1/3 of our energy bill goes to heating water. So if we're using less of it, actually, you know, it has lots of win-wins. I think in the landscape, I think it's really interesting. The North Water Strategy Programme, which we're involved in, you know, has shown that if you know, with modelling with the Environment Agency, absolutely demonstrated the potential for holding water on the land, restoring connectivity between rainfall and the aquifer. And, you know, the figures are kind of 10% increase in low flow at Cossey, just here where we are now. You know, that's a really significant improvement. The question is absolutely how do we finance it? And clearly we need to value that water in a different way, so that actually, you know, both kind of commercially, but also from the public purse, we're actually incentivizing those activities to infiltrate water. I would really guard against the idea that guaranteed water rights are, you know, guaranteed water rights that aren't vested very much directly into sustainability is a real problem, because that's actually the system we have now. That's what, you know, like, well, people who were given licenses of right in the 1950s, you know, often without reference to actually how much water was being used or the environmental thresholds, you know, that's created massive issues both for water companies and from private license holders. If we look to the American West, they have a very different water rights system, but exactly the same problems, where over-allocation and without reference to environmental thresholds has led to massive social kind of issues and environmental and agricultural issues. So I think whatever we do in that space absolutely has to be kind of fixed in what is ultimately a political question around affordability and equity, as well as the environment. And those are really deep political questions. There's no economic model that will tell you that's the answer.
Can we just add that we are spending 104 billion on the water, but over the next 5 years through the AMP8 programme.
Extraordinary.
Over half of which is around combined sewer overflow. So that's actually putting concrete storage tanks in the ground rather than separating out rainwater, which is a lot more difficult for water companies to do. They'd love to do it.
Yeah.
But they don't have control over households and gardens and roads and land.
Okay. So thank you very much. It's been... time evaporates when we're having interesting conversations, which is always very frustrating. But we've got 1 minute, so 1 minute, so 20 seconds each. looking ahead to the next, say, 10 to 20 years, what do you think will be the single biggest shift we'll see in how landscapes are managed to adapt to climate change? And what gives you hope within that? So we'll start with you.
What, the biggest thing?
Yeah.
I don't know. Regenerative agriculture. I'd really like to see a technological shift towards regenerative agriculture and a more peopled landscape and productive landscape.
Great. Lovely. Yep.
Yeah, for me, I think like what I see here is a lot of enthusiasm, activity, and what I see in Norfolk and in England is a lot of activity. What I would love to see, and what I hope I see, is some of this coming together in a more integrated and coordinated approach. Because I think there's already a huge amount of money flowing. There could be more, but we need to be working collectively and not in competition and not in tension with each other. So that's what I hope I see. And what gives me hope, maybe just some of the reforms around the water sector regulation and Cunningham, if that means anything to you, might bring some of those things forward.
Best report ever. Ben.
Similar to Rob, actually, all these changes, all schemes based on catchment level, landscape level, rather than sort of individual islands of changes, sort of like the collaborative approach between farmers, whether that's in clusters or whatever.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Audience, please can you join me in thanking the panel for a brilliant contribution this afternoon. I'm sorry, that's gone so quickly.
So quick.
Yeah. So quickly.